This is the Finesse Media Podcast, Season 3.
Ms. Woods. So welcome back, another episode of Finesse Media Podcast, Season 3. I'm your host, Cam Finesse Media. And as mentioned right before the break, we got someone on, again, that's finessing the game. You see it on the screen. But I definitely like to introduce to some, welcome to others, legendary, the Nikki Woods. With so many years of talent, Nikki Woods has done things with Tom Joyner. Where I'm from, Chicago, Illinois, with the crazy Howard McGhee show. Definitely want to jump into that. But for the first time joining the podcast, the Finesse Media Podcast, Season 3, make some noise and show some love for my girl, the Nikki Woods. What's going on, Miss Woods?
So happy to be here. I'm so excited.
Listen, I told you right before I press record that I'm super nervous to have you on, so I'll continue that transparency. But no, seriously, you're someone who, growing up in Chicago, as I mentioned, listening to WGCI every single day. I said it, crazy Howard McGhee, listening to that crazy guy. But I never saw your face. And back in that time, not making or telling dates here, but radio was just it. You had no social media. So you really listened to the radio for the personalities and not necessarily so much for the media back then. I mean, just how was that? I mean, that's not the direction of my interview, but I started that because I'm from Chicago. So yeah, I'm gonna jump right into it. How was that working with crazy Howard McGhee, and how did that opportunity even start?
You know, it's really interesting because I started in TV and I didn't like it at all. Like, it was just so superficial, and it's like everybody, I would report that somebody got murdered and they want to know where I got my shoes. I mean, it was just really crazy. And so you hit it on the nail. Like, radio was so intimate. It was so personal. All it was like us having a conversation. Yeah. Like, you couldn't get caught up in what people looked like. None of that happened. And so, I fell in love with radio. I was in Boston for a while, but I had gone to school in Chicago. So GCI was always the goal for me. That was like the goal. That was like the top goal. And I was in Boston, and every week I would send Elroy, who was the program director at that time, my air check, which is what I sounded like on the air, and a resume. And I'd get that little form letter, like, we're not hiring. And I did that for like a year. And so I eventually left Boston, and I was on my way to Jacksonville, Florida, but my sister still lived outside of Chicago. And so I was like, well, I'll just stop in. Like, I'll just go say hi. I've been mailing, and it wasn't even emailing. It was like physical mail, like, for a year.
You have to wait for it.
They know who I am, right? And so I went up there, and luckily I had an air check, and Elroy wasn't there, but the assistant program, Jay Allen, who is still doing, he's doing Soul 106.3, I think, in Chicago now. He was there, and so we were talking, and then Elroy came, and I was like, we were talking, and Elroy was like, well, let me hear what you sound like. So I popped in the tape, and I got hired that day. I had to call Jacksonville and tell them I wasn't coming. So I was hired that day. Literally, they had to make a space for me.
But you're growing up in Missouri and being in this space in Chicago. I mean, that just had to be, kind of different too, because that was a suburb part of Missouri where you grew up in.
Yeah, no, I grew up in a really small town. Mm-hmm. It was a St. Louis County suburb, but it was small. And it was very close knit. Like, we knew everybody. My dad was the mayor. So, I mean, it's like, everybody knew you. You couldn't go anywhere and not be known.
Especially when your dad's the mayor.
Like, police would like follow me home to make sure it was just, you couldn't date, you couldn't do anything. And so I was like, I'm going as far away as possible. And so I went to Howard for college. And that kind of just like opened up everything. And actually, Tom Joyner's son, Thomas Jr., was at Howard when I was there. And no inkling about radio. I was going to be a teacher, and I actually graduated with my degree in education. And so I was a 5th grade teacher for a while. But for whatever reason, I was like, this isn't it for me. And I decided to go into broadcast journalism. So I went back to school. Mm-hmm. But yeah, GCI was like always my goal. Like, I thought I would end my career at GCI.
You can't say Chicago without saying GCI. It's so funny because anytime I hear another like syndicated radio station, if I'm in another city and they're like GCI such and such, I'm like, no, we should have copywritten GCI. I mean, because really, go ahead.
was gonna say, and Chicago is such a great city, and they love all of their personalities, for lack of a better word. So sports figures,
Pink
radio,
House.
TV, anybody. They just love on you, whether you're from there or not. People think I'm from Chicago.
I always
Like,
thought you
oh.
were from. When I done my research, I go, wait, first off, she's not from Chicago. Then I had to understand what part of Missouri on the map was she from. But I always thought you were from Chicago. I remember tweeting you years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, when Twitter was sort of popular. And you would follow me on Twitter. We would tweet back and forth. And I was working in Chicago at a mattress store and would just tweet back and forth. And I go, oh my gosh, she's super genuine. She's a real person, because you sounded so robotic in the best way on air. And I'm like, wait, she's a real person. She tweets back, and you were very kind to me. So thank you for that. You really were. And I was saying to you then, hey, I'm coming to Dallas and maybe we can do lunch. And here I am now, Nikki Woods, in Dallas, Texas.
We're in Dallas.
Yeah, so I'm in Dallas. I moved here 5 years ago, almost now 6. Yeah, but when I was discussing it and conversing with you, I was in Chicago, and then maybe 2 years afterwards, I moved to New York. I got married after meeting my wife after 2 weeks.
Did you really?
Ma'am, yes.
I gotta interview you about that. That's amazing.
No, but you were at Howard University, as you mentioned, in starting your journey there, and then you ultimately got your degree at St. Francis University. So how was your experience at St. Francis University doing your undergrad?
It was very concentrated on radio and TV. I mean, it was the best experience I could have had to get me prepared for my career. Like, I partied at Howard. Like, Howard was like, I got all of that out of my system when I got to St. Francis, because I was a couple of years older than everybody else. And so it was like, I was really just focused on getting done and getting out. But they had such a great program with, I was the station manager at, the TV station manager at the school. I mean, you got hands-on experience. And so that's what I loved about St. Francis. But it was small enough and diverse enough that you really were able to focus on what you were trying to do. So it was a good place for me to be.
Mm-hmm. And that's how I feel too, Nikki, kind of being at those small schools. Every time someone comes on, I give the opportunity to say, this is my alumni school, University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. So I went to school in the South. So that was certainly different for me, kind of traveling the way you went to Howard and being from a small town in Missouri. But the HBCU experience for me was just all the way different, because I was like, wait, these folks jumping around the fraternities and sororities, that is. And I just had no idea that life really.
Family is my beloved Alpha Kappa Alpha, our Divine Nine, and my HBCU brothers and sisters.
Existed, but it was a fun time. But speaking of Howard and speaking of HBCUs, we're about to elect our first Black African American vice president, Kamala Harris. So what's your thoughts about that? Because she's also a Howard alumni.
Well, she's been elected.
Right, she's been elected, right?
We'll put her through that again at all. You know what? We've known Kamala since, she was in, I think it was Michigan, or she's been around. And so we've always talked to her. She's always been really solid, really upfront, really straightforward. I think she brings a lot of flavor to the whole, Joe Biden ticket and the presidency there. And so I couldn't be prouder. I mean, I thought I was proud, with Barack, and I was. And Michelle, and being from Chicago, it's like, we knew Barack before he was even state senator. So to be able to to have interviewed him at every stage in his career, and we were actually in DC when he was inaugurated the first time. It's just been amazing, and I feel the same way about Kamala. I think she's brilliant. I think she's a perfect choice, just like Barack. And I'm really excited to see how we're going to recover from the current presidency.
No, absolutely. And it's been a crazy whirlwind in 2020, but Nikki Woods, you're still on the move, no pun or all puns intended with your podcast Move, highlighting women on the move. So I checked out a couple of episodes. I'm inspired, even as a man listening to it, because this platform, just to kind of, set the stage, is about talking to people that is finessing the game. But really what that means for me is those people that got a story, and everybody has a story. And so when you say women on the move and talking to women, that's kind of transferable for any male or female. So how did you start that podcast, Move?
So interestingly enough, it was called Women on the Go. We started that like 13 years ago when I was still in Chicago. And the guy that gave me my first job in radio, we were doing it together, Ken Johnson. And we just both got so busy when I came to Tom and all of this that we stopped doing it. And so we reinvented. Welcome to Move, a podcast magazine for women. We are formerly Women on the Go, and we are here for women busy with work, kids, a business, whatever keeps you moving. And we are going to keep you informed into Move.
Okay.
But we were doing a podcast before people were doing podcasts. Like we had this whole thing going on. And it was a lot of fun. But unlike you, like I love the conversation. I love the information. I love just learning about people and their stories. And often, when you have somebody on, you think you're going to talk to them about one thing, and then you hear their story. And like today I was interviewing a lady about business, but then I found out she was a triathlon and a mother of 5 who had just lost 100 pounds. I'm like, okay, wait a minute, we got to talk about that.
Right. That's
business in a minute. Well, I just love people's stories. I like learning, how they got to where they are. And like you, I think that everybody, has a story, whether you're a celebrity or whether you're famous or whether you're an influencer or whatever. I think everybody has a story that other people can learn from.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And just kind of going back, turning the wheels, the beginning of your story. When did you first fall in love with media? Because Tom Joyner is, as we know, the hardest working man, and in the business. He also coined you one of the hardest working women in the business. So how did you first kind of discover that was something that you really wanted to do?
I don't know. And when I was looking at the information that you sent, I was like, I'm gonna ask my daddy, like if he remembers like us ever having a conversation about it. But it's like in retrospect, it's like this is what I always should have been doing. I mean, this is what I've done all my life, and it just wasn't in any kind of a formal thing. Like I remember like, my dad coming home from work, and he would take a shower while the first airing of the news was on. And so I would give him my version of the news when he was done before he saw the real news. And so it's like, I just love the conversations.
Yeah.
And so, but nobody ever said, what you should consider, I come from like a Jamaican family where, if you're not a teacher or a nurse or a doctor, like you have no purpose in life. And so my parents still don't quite understand what I'm doing, but I think they've come to accept it.
But you mentioned your dad and your mom and being influential and kind of guiding you through your career. But you're a mom of 2. You got your 2 boys, Travis and Willis. How is that? But they're teenagers. They're not even babies no more.
Oh my! When I tell you, my oldest son is now, and it's so funny because I remember when I had him, and I was in Chicago at GCI. And when I had him, like I was on the air like 2 minutes later talking about.
So he was born. Your sons were born in Chicago.
They were born while I was at GCI, both of them, yeah. And so my oldest son is 18 and he's a freshman in college, and my youngest one is 17 and soon to be. And it's just the best thing in the world. It really is. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's, obviously there's, the growing up in the teenage years and now them trying to find themselves as adults. But I mean, they're really, really awesome kids. And I really can't take all the credit for that. They've done a lot, to grow themselves. But it's just the best feeling in the world. Do you have kids yet?
Do I? So, Nikki Woods. So, Nikki Woods. I do. I have a 10-month-old.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had a pandemic baby, right? I have a 10-month-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and I have 3 boys. So I'm busy.
I stopped at the second one because the second one was supposed to be a girl, and he came out a boy. I was like, no more, I'm done. Like, I'm not having my own basketball team. I'm just
so, Nikki, I told you I'm in Dallas, so swing up the block if you need to pick up your nephews.
What? You could tweet me when you were somewhere else, but now that we're in the same city, you just like have nothing to say.
So how is that? I mean, because I've been here 6 years in Dallas, and I love this place. And I listen to people like Badu who says like the air is different here, and it's clean, the water. I enjoy it. I feel like there's a sense of peace living here. What do you think about living in Dallas?
I love it now. And I think I love it because my kids love it, and because I think a lot safer than if we were still in Chicago. But I think that you have to be like for me, I had to be at a certain point in life, because leaving Chicago was like, it was rough. And coming from like New York, I mean, it's a transition period because it's just not the same vibe. And so, but now it's just, you're right. I mean, it's just peaceful, and, people are nice, and, and you just do what you do. But I think that it's been a great environment for kids, especially boys, and if they love sports at all. This is a great place for them to be.
Yeah, I mean, my cousin, he's a junior varsity defensive coach in DeSoto, and these kids, the Titans, shout out to the Titans if they're watching. But these kids, I mean, they come from all different communities, from different schools, and where I'm from in Chicago, you really didn't have that. I mean, that program, much less that community, and then people traveling from different sides of town. It was kind of like if you were on the west side, you stayed on the west side. So I see people that comes from way up. I'm in Frisco, so I see folks that come from way up north traveling down to DeSoto, taking their kids to practice. And so I do appreciate that community here, and that coaching, and that real tight knit. But as mentioned, coaches, I'm having good segues, Doc. So definitely give me a report card at the end, because you're a professional at what you do. But when you think about coaches, I always say, if a coach doesn't have a coach, you met a hypocrite. So who is your mentor? Who's been, I mean, Tom Joyner, you can say it off the top, but I can imagine that you being, shaken in this industry for so many years, and the educational background that you have, rubbed elbows with many different folks that have taught you the game along the way. Who are some of your mentors?
I try to learn from everybody that I come in contact with. I mean, definitely Tom, and not necessarily from radio, even though that too, but Tom really taught me about how to take a passion and like make it into a business. I mean, Tom is a pioneer when it comes to owning your own stuff, right? And so I think that I really got that from him, but I have to learn from everybody. But I always have, even when now that I have my own business, like I have business coaches and business mentors. I think I learned from everybody. But probably, I think if I had to pick one person, especially in the radio business, it would probably be Elroy, who was the PD when I was there. Elroy was really very hands-on, almost to the point where it was annoying. Like you kind of wanted to go the other way when you saw him coming. But he cared about you. And I think that that's the difference with a lot of people that, you work with, even though it's in a professional setting, you can really tell he cared about you, and he cared about you as a person, and he cared about your growth. He still called me, and it's been, 12 years since him and I worked together. And he still calls me every once in a while. He's just like, I just want to remind you, I'm your biggest fan, it just pumps you up. So I think he, and I think I learned the biggest lesson from him about how to get fired that I've learned from anybody. Elroy, you would have thought Elroy had gotten $1 million bonus the way he left after they fired him.
Oh my goodness.
And it was just with such grace. And you could definitely tell that extended his career in radio, because radio is such a small business, entertainment is such a small business, that if you burn a bridge, you could end your career.
Yes.
And so I think that I told him that all the time, like, I learned how to get fired watching you get fired. but yeah, Elroy is probably one of my biggest mentors in this business.
Or just taking some time off is what I like to call it. We don't get fired, we take time off.
You've been fired a couple of times, like you aren't doing your job. So it's like getting fired sometimes is a badge of honor for us.
Well, let's coach our listeners and people who are watching, because you are the coach, you're the marketing, you're the strategist, so let's dive into some of the things that you're telling your people on the podcast and things that you work in your media form. So what are some media do's and don'ts, some media pitches, do's and don'ts, you would say? So
the very basic thing, and I think this is probably, it's the simplest thing, but it's like the most difficult thing I think for people to grasp, is that if you have a business or a brand or a book or a story or whatever, you're trying to pitch yourself to get an interview in the media, especially like traditional media, but it's a podcast, and this, it really is more important that you start with whatever value that you bring to the interview and not what it is that you're trying to sell. So don't ever like put in the subject line, I just released a book, I want to tell your audience about it, or I have a new service that I want to talk about. I mean, it really is about the value that's in the book or in the service. I mean, if you've written, a book about how to become a millionaire in 2021, then you have some tips that you can share with the audience that will get them interested enough to buy the book. So you don't have to pitch the book. You just have to pitch the value, and then everything else sells itself. And I think that's the biggest thing, because people are so focused on trying to get the sale that they forget that they need to give value. And the quickest way to not get invited back is to focus on the sell. Like Tom has hung up on people because they wouldn't stop talking about their book.
All right. So that's the biggest tip you would give.
That's the biggest thing. Once people get that, it'll become a lot easier. And obviously there are nuances and all of that, but that is like the biggest thing I want people to get.
In 2020, Nikki, I do logos and on the side amongst this podcast and be a dad and etc. But what I've seen in 2020 is so many businesses just start to formulate and grow. And I'm excited about doing a lot of the brands or the logos for these brands, because I know that in 2020, we were able to kind of sit, learn, reevaluate, and those, types of things. So in 2020, what did you learn? And what creative things that came out of your kind of mind of thoughts?
The biggest thing I learned was that you can always pivot. I mean, sometimes you can't, follow the plan until the ship goes down. Sometimes you have to, get into the dinghy and go a different way. But I think I also realized that I had done a lot of work that prepared me for stability during that period, and not necessarily financial stability, even though my company probably did the biggest numbers that it's ever done. But just the piece of not being worried about, is this client going to be able to pay, or am I going to run out of, is everybody going to say no? And I'm going to, I think that's the biggest thing for me. I mean, so many people were just like so panicked that they couldn't even see like what to do next. And so I think for me, that showed me that I was doing the work, but it also did show me that I had more work to do. So I really did, like you say, concentrate on putting better systems in place, reevaluating the things that I was doing, streamlining things, because so many things for me slowed down. Like I was traveling every week. I was in, 3 different cities every month. I was in London once a month because I had a client in London. And so when COVID hit, like everything just stopped. Yeah. And it just seemed like there were so many hours.
It was crazy.
It was crazy. And so, but after I kind of got used to just being, at home, I just started looking at all of the things personally and professionally that I could do better. And this gave me a chance to really look at things, dig things out, improve things, stop doing some things, and really, really work on that. And I think that's been very beneficial.
Absolutely. And after somebody watches this episode and check into the things that you've done, get caught up on your history or get caught up on your HERstory, if they have not at this point, but let's coach those people off the couch, or let's coach those people who wasn't as motivated in 2020. What do you say to that person, and what encouragement would you give to that person who is scared to start their business and they contemplated, or still contemplating about just starting?
I would say is to really do some kind of self-evaluation and make sure that this is what you want to do. Like not everybody has to be an entrepreneur. I mean, it's not the life for everybody. And not everybody has to be just a full-time entrepreneur. Some people have jobs in their own business and they're perfectly happy. And I was that way for a long time. One of the biggest decisions I had to make was to resign because I loved what I did, so much. So I would say really take some time to evaluate. And if you are still working, if you do still have a job, then really, start to build your business so that when you are ready to make that transition, if that's a decision you make, that you have a good foundation in place. And then I would also say, look at some businesses. If you were about to start a business, look at some of the businesses that people are now going to use or need after COVID. So one of the things that I did was I started a credit repair agency. Because so many people were out of jobs and, not paying their bills, and their credit is going to tank, and then, they're going to need a lot of work. And it was making money from day one because people really do need it. And it's just outside of me, but it's just another revenue stream in case, this continues and, things change. You really do have to look at things that people want, things that people need, and things that can diversify your income. I mean, Nikki Woods Media is great, but if Nikki Woods doesn't show up, Nikki Woods Media. And I wanted to create something that didn't solely depend on me.
No, that's good advice. So come on, get up off the couch. And like you said, you don't necessarily have to start a business. But if you're thinking about, for people that's listening or watching us, and you're not sure if you should leave your business and start your passion, well, you can do both. You got 24 hours in a day. And if you just commit maybe 1 hour to start your business, or to just do whatever it is that you're scared to do, you don't have to leave your current job. I typically just say, you can certainly use your current paying job to fund your passion. So
it's your investment. And if I can build a business with the hours that I work and the demanding, I don't think people even realize like the time that most of us had to put in with Tom. And just the nuances, because it was me, and I was like the only single mom with young kids, and we were in 122 cities. So on any given day, Tom could be like, wheels up at noon, we're going to Indiana. And I'm like, I got kids, like the whole life I have to arrange in order to do that. But that was part of the job. And so just make sure it's something that you want, but then also, know that this. You can't start a business and leave yourself at home, right? And so if you have any kind of a personal problem, or if you have any kind of a, your faith isn't strong enough or whatever, it is going to leak into your business. And so you have to work on your profession and constantly growing and learning there, but personally, you have to continue to do the work as well. It's like, I don't think I've ever had to have the kind of faith that I've had to have, as an entrepreneur, because even though, you can have the most demanding job, it's still a job where every Friday or whatever, every 2 weeks that paycheck is going to hit.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't, there's some recourse you can take, and that's not the way as an entrepreneur.
No, definitely. Entrepreneur, if you don't work, you don't eat, for real.
Yeah, and so you really do have to have a certain amount of faith. But then the other thing that, and I was talking about this earlier, the other thing that I think that people do when they start their own business is they just create another job for themselves. Yeah. And so it's like, we're so busy as entrepreneurs, and clearly you have to make a sacrifice in the beginning, but you want to set it up so that you free yourself up to live the life that you're building this business to support, and that it's not this chained to a computer all the time, and if you're not there, then nothing happens kind of situation. So I always suggest that people look at the long term, like, what do you want the long term to look like? If you're going to be building a staff, start putting those systems in place. If you want to be, just have a laptop business, then make sure that you understand all of the online marketing and have those automation systems in place. But look further down than, I just want to call myself an entrepreneur, and really look at how you want to live your life and how this business is going to benefit it.
Absolutely. Nikki Woods is dropping gems, as they say, on the new app called Clubhouse. Nikki, are you on Clubhouse?
Oh, God. My goodness. I am. And I love the conversation, but it's just like another thing to do. It's like just another section. But I think it's a very unique app, and I think that people are getting a lot of value out of it, and I think it's really good for networking.
Yes.
But I think you need to pick your poison. I don't think you should be everywhere all the time. You'll never be able to run your business.
No, absolutely. I tell some folks in some rooms I've been in, it's not really helpful to just follow everybody. You get into some of these rooms, they go, everybody follow the moderators, follow the moderators. I'm like, the moderator is into something totally different than I am. And if I'm in this hallway, I'm watching maybe some rooms he's in, and I'm not, or she, and I'm not trying to jump into that. So no, the club space is really, really crazy. But I can't let you get up out of here, Nikki Woods, the hardest working woman in show business, without talking about working with the hardest man in show business. The fly job, Tom Joyner. Whoo, how was that working alongside of that guy?
It was the best and the worst of times. Wasn't that like a Charles Dickens thing? No, it wasn't the worst of anything. But it was a hard position to have. But it was so wonderful all at the same time. It's like every day. Imagine just, going into a studio and laughing for like 4 hours straight, with like Jay and all the other, and just the conversation. It was really, it was a really great way to end the career. And I think about, all the things that TV and radio has done, and the experiences dad to the White House, and my parents and my kids to the White House. And I don't think my dad thought I was legit until Barack recognized me and knew my name. And my dad was like, oh, maybe she really did have a job, So we've done so many things. My kids have had so many experiences. Like they've been on the stage when the Jackson 5 was performing. They've met, all of the great Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and all of the greats. It's like they've done things that most kids wouldn't necessarily get to do, and all because I had this career. And that's kind of what I put in my mind when I think about all the sacrifices that we also had to make because of my career. But it was phenomenal. It was challenging, it was demanding, but you're talking about working for a guy, like when they had the hurricane in Haiti, like Tom was like, fire up the jet, like we're going to Haiti, and I'm like, Tom, I don't think they're gonna let us in, it's an earthquake, we can't land. We went to the Dominican Republic and waited, and then we went to Haiti. So it's like those kind of things, that you just wouldn't. We got to go to the whole Star Wars camp. And the guy, what's his name, George, whatever, Lucas, like he took us through a tour of the Star Wars thing. It was, so those kind of things you don't necessarily get to do. So it's like if I weigh the sacrifices and I weigh the long hours and I weigh the 2 a.m. calls from Tom talking about, say, man, I got an idea. And I'm say, man, I'm asleep. Kind of thing. It just was a wonderful ride. It really was.
Cool. Because working at GCI with Crazy Howard McGhee, you're having 1 million listeners, but then you get to Tom join the morning show where you got some 8 million listeners. Was any of that pressure on for you saying, wait, I gotta, no pressure at all?
No. I think one of the things that I learned, especially as a woman in this kind of business, I was telling people like, Roland Martin and Don Lemon and Jesse Jackson, like what to do, B.L. Hughley, it's like, I was the one that was like telling them, what to do. And I had to go in knowing who I was and what value that I brought to the show. And I told Tom, I was like, look, it's not going to work if we're not a team. Like I can't tell Jay to do something and then you come behind me and tell him to do something else. Because even though technically Tom wasn't my boss, Tom was my boss. So it's like the man's name was in the jingle. And so he had obviously a lot of weight. So I had to go in knowing that I had to put my foot down. And that's why I told a couple of people, like, don't mess with me. Like, it's not gonna go well for you. But starting with that kind of respect made it a lot easier for them to trust me and trust my judgment. Because at the end of the day, the buck stopped with me before it got to Tom. And if anything went wrong, Tom was looking at me. He wasn't looking at anybody else. Like the website could go down and Tom would be like, well, Nikki, what's going on?
Like I'm the senior producer here. Like I'm not.
So it's like everybody sees me as like this producer, but I'm like, no.
See, I've always wanted to be the talent. And so that's what you did. Coming outside of, from the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and he's been retired and you're now the front center host, of Nikki Woods Media. Do you ever call Tom and say, hey, come on out of retirement?
Hey, man.
Because I'm still working.
No, I want Tom to stay retired. I really do. Tom has worked, Tom has been in radio longer than I've been alive.
Wow.
So Tom has done, I wanted him to retire for a long time ago, to be honest. Tom deserves to enjoy the fruits of his labor. He really does. And I think that he's still doing so much good without having to get up at 3:00 in the morning, with his, with the HBCU, foundation, the Tom Joyner Foundation, the HBCUs and all of that. I think it's sometimes that you have to say, okay, I've done all I can do in this current role. And I think that one of the things that it took Tom a while is because he felt responsible for all of the people he had on staff. Like he had a whole company. And if he retired, there goes the company. So, and so luckily he was able to diverse and bring in new talent, and it's continued, like with Ricky Smiley and D.L. Hughley and all of those people, but he really did pay his dues.
Absolutely.
And it really was at the end, difficult for him trying to to exist in a social media world where everybody wanted you to be, 25 and tweeting.
Yeah.
I don't Twitter.
And people stayed following Tom. If it was to the boat, on the cruises, or if it was on the plane, but they followed Tom in radio. It was like, okay, what Tom thinks about it. And he stayed true to who he was. He's a great man of Omega Psi Phi. So he's my Greek brother. But I love Tom, and I just kind of always wanted to know what was your insight of working with Tom. But what's the legacy? My last question, Nikki Woods, because you certainly have one, Queen. What is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
I told my son the other day, I was like, when I die, all I want on my tombstone is that I showed up. I think that so many people miss opportunities because they just don't show up, and they don't show up to the best of their ability, because either they think it's just a job or whatever it is. But now that my kids both have jobs, and my youngest son actually got a recommendation from his manager. Actually, it was the state manager of the restaurant. And I cried when I read this recommendation. I've never gotten a recommendation like that. I mean, it was glowing. And I sent it to my dad, because I always say I got my work ethic from my father. Like, the reason that I'm able to work so hard is because I watched my father, and I watched him work with such integrity that, that's just what I knew. And it was funny because my dad came to Dallas, and my mom, and we took him into the studio, and Tom was asking my dad, he was like, so how, has Nikki told you how she likes Dallas? And he's like, yeah. He's like, oh, that's good. Is she working out for you? Like, is she doing the job that you need her to do? It was like, always focused on the work ethic. But I realized when I saw that recommendation letter that even though I never said, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this, that they were watching me. And I mean, he literally, the last line was, whatever he puts his mind to, he'll be able to do. Because he's just such a hard and determined worker, but he also has the ability to motivate people and inspire people and do things that most people wouldn't do. And that's what I pride myself on. Like, I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do. And so, and realizing that every role is important. I think that's also the biggest lesson I learned from radio and being part of a team. Tom's name is in the jingle, but Tom couldn't have done that by himself. He needed Sybil, he needed Jay, he needed me, he needed the person pushing the button and playing the music and the production. And he knew that, and he gave all of us our just rewards and our props. And he really was good at making sure that everybody had a chance to shine. He was a brilliant conductor, because he just kind of moved things along and let everybody do what they had to do. But I think my legacy is my children, but it's also that no matter what happens, I showed up.
The Nikki Woods, thank you so much for joining the podcast this season 3. I had another one of our Chicago personalities who was, I mean, really, for me, I was so honored. I wasn't going to say he was honored. I was so honored to have AC Green on. I told him I was listening to him give real estate advice, and I didn't even have a house at the time, but I was taking notes then, and him giving tips and tricks about mortgages. And so I had him on last season, and so to have the Nikki Woods on this season, I'm done. The season can wrap after this.
I'll retire now.
No. I very intentional. I wanted to speak with you, as I mentioned several years ago, reaching out to you on Twitter, and you've been very gracious then and kind, and still to this day. So I thank you for taking the time out your schedule, to speak with me and have this conversation and get caught up on the things that you're doing. And hopefully our listeners took some things away from the lessons and some of the gems that you dropped. So before you get up out of here, Ms. Woods, let people know how they can keep up with you and also catch you on all the social media platforms.
No, absolutely. So I love interacting with people on social media. In fact, my mom says it's easier to tweet me than it is to call me. So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Those are probably, and LinkedIn. Those are probably the places you'll find me most. And it's Nikki Woods everywhere. But I am on Clubhouse now, and I'm learning that. So it's just really exciting. But there's a whole Chicago radio room that you should check out too on Clubhouse. So
no, I'm not. And because I didn't know you were on Clubhouse, I'll be following you once I wrap this up so I can see where that is. Because that's how it is. You got to be in proximity with people. And so I love that part about it.
Yeah, follow me. I'll follow you back, and I'll ping you when we have another radio conversation. But like,
Cool
yeah, like
beans.
Mike Love and the Diz and Rick Party and
Oh my
all of-
goodness.
yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like some of the people that, you know, we listened to or we worked with, and, you know, that has come out of Chicago and the things. that
Herb Kent was somebody who I would have loved to have picked brain. I used to work with Selena Johnson when she lived and I lived in Chicago. And Herb Kent was at an event. We were at a silent auction, and it was the first time I was able to meet him. And I was like, Herb, I listened to you, and like he had the best voice. And when I saw him, I was like, wait, that's Herb? But he's a cool, chill.
Yeah, everybody says that when it's because he's so skinny and, you know,
Yeah.
he's got this booming voice that just like,
Yeah, but he lit up the room definitely still with his grace and his kindness too. But we'll talk all day. I'm in Dallas, Texas, so I may see you at the Parks Mall. Or...
It's free, literally, right up the street. So yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch.
Definitely, y'all. Nikki Woods, definitely keep up with everything she got going. Again, thank you, Miss Woods, for taking the time to join me on this podcast. You've been listening to another episode of Finesse Media Podcast, Season 3, and I'll see you next week with something brand new. Peace.
This has been another edition of the Finesse Media Podcast. Join us again next week for the latest news from HBCUs. Special guest